Hello everybody and welcome to Panzer Corps 2. This is an upcoming World War II hex-based, turn-based strategy game from Flashback Games and published by Slitherine. The game comes out on March 19th and I was sent a work-in-progress build ahead of its release, courtesy of Slitherine, so thank you to them for that. In this video, I'm going to be detailing and outlining most of the mechanics at play in the game, really getting into the nitty-gritty and intricacies of how this hex board works, as I think that's just the best way to show off the game for people who are going to be interested in it. So for reference, I haven't played a Panzer Corps game before, so in this video I won't be able to compare the two. I'm just coming into this one fresh. After playing it though, I have now purchased Panzer Corps 1 as it was on sale, and I'm hoping to do a bit more of a comparison in future. So just before we take a look at the gameplay itself and how all of that works, I wanted to talk about the amount of content you can expect in the game. Now, this is going to sound kind of sponsory, but I'm not sponsored for this, I promise. I just thought it was worth noting with what the full game is going to entail, because when I looked at it on Steam, I was actually really impressed. Panzer Corps 2 is set to feature a large series of branching campaigns that have 60 scenarios. The scenarios themselves will then contain multiple battles within them, where you carry the same troops over from battle to battle as they gain their veterancy. There's then 10 standalone scenarios you can play for single player, and 10 scenarios that are more balanced for multiplayer, as well as a random map generator for skirmish mode, and a pretty good map editor so you can create your own and share them online. Had a little dabble with it, and it seems quite powerful. You can also then customize the gameplay with extra difficulties, such as adding Fog of War, Iron Man modes, removing the undo ability, and adding a variety of challenges that were in the previous games, such as turn reductions, income handicaps, and increases to enemy hit points. The game is also set to feature over 1,000 unique different units belonging to every major power in the European theater, and you can also play as each of them. In my build, I could play as Germany, the USA, Great Britain, USSR, and Italy, and also fought against Poland in the campaign, and each of these all had around 100 units in their roster, so there is quite a lot of variety of stuff to come up against. So for my first time playing, I started with the campaign and the invasion of Poland. You can choose whether or not to start with the south or the north, and then you get different benefits depending on which one you choose. And when first trying the game, I was streaming it, and I began with the north, but later in my own time where I played a little bit longer, I started with the south. With both missions, you get a brief overview of what to do, which is mainly to occupy certain tiles to achieve victory within a certain turn limit. Now there are other modes in the game, it's not always a time limit situation, and sometimes the time limit is way longer, but for the battles that I played, it was just 15 turns to get the job done. Now as you start your campaign, you can actually make your own commander. By default, you can take one good perk, but then for every subsequent good perk that you want, you also have to take a negative. So based on the campaign, you can decide what you think would suit the situation most. You could take things like extra troop deployments, faster tanks, instant recon, stronger anti-air, and things like that. And for the negatives, you could be hit with penalties to those things, or you could even go so far as to deny yourself the ability to use artillery or air altogether. So on deployment, two things are at your disposal: prestige, which is sort of like your currency for buying new units, and then core slots, which is the amount of units that you can currently field. Units then have a variety of stats, namely for soft attacks against unarmored, and then hard attacks against armor. Then there's ground, air, and close defense, accuracy, recon, and a few other things like that. So let's take a look at some of the stats and how they work, the main ones that are kind of at play in the game. The most important stat is probably going to be your strength. That's the red heart icon, and this determines the hit points of the unit, but also its attack. So when a unit takes damage, it then doesn't do as much damage back. Every attack, when two units are just next to each other on the tiles, they're then going to meet each other with a counter attack. This is what you can see on the UI when you're about to attack someone, how much damage they'll take, and then how much damage you'll take when they counter attack. Depending on a unit's initiative stat, it'll decide how much damage they'll initially do in its attack versus the counter. The idea being that you want high initiative to deal enough damage to the enemy so that when they counterattack, it isn't very strong. Another major factor that plays into this is suppression. That's the blue heart icon. Suppression is always at 0 at the start of every turn for every unit, and as a unit gets attacked, suppression will then build up. And basically, suppression is going to be taking away from their strength. Some units don't do that much damage, but they have great suppression, such as artillery and strategic bombers. So if you suppress a unit, then attack it, its counterattack can often just do no damage at all. If suppression is really bad, the unit may retreat or surrender, Now each turn the suppression resets to 0 unless that unit is encircled, and encirclement doesn't just mean wrapping around the one hex where they are. You can perform a large encirclement around a lot of units so long as they just have no way out without crossing an adjacent hex to one of yours. So that's your kind of zone of control. Every hex touching one of your units is your zone of control. As long as they have no way out without passing through your zone of control, they can be encircled. So leaving a 1 to 2 tile gap between your units can work in your favor to set up an encirclement, and that will then stop their ability to heal, regain their suppression each turn, regain their fuel, and regain ammo. So you might be thinking, oh, fuel and ammo, but there's no real massively complex supply system in the game. Each turn, a unit's fuel and ammo will fully replenish, and this is essentially just their movement points and how many attacks they have for that particular turn. You can only attack once with a unit per turn, but the ammo will actually count for their counterattacks, so their defensive attacks, you could say. So you can imagine if you have a particularly dug-in unit, but it's encircled, it might only fire back 4 or 5 times before that ammo runs out. So encirclements are pretty big deals. You're essentially just suffocating them without the ability for them to heal, get their ammo back, or even move anymore. Now I mentioned being dug in. If a unit stays still for a turn, they'll gain entrenchment, the amount of which is decided based on the terrain. So standing on a fortified position might give them 5 entrenchment automatically. Then each turn after that they always gain 1 up to their maximum. The maximum is also just then decided by the terrain. Entrenchment is a hard debuff to enemy damage for vehicles, bombardment, and infantry. And typically, an attack removes 1 entrenchment, so you'll need multiple attacks within the same turn, or bombers that can do 2 or 3 damage at once to cancel out that gain rate. Entrenchment is particularly good against vehicles. A 10 out of 10 entrenched unit will take a negative 100% to vehicle damage and a negative 80% to infantry damage, so it's just a very stubborn thing to uproot. You'll need to really work away at it with air attacks and artillery, which can take time, and working against the clock can really challenge you. So another tactic would just be to try and encircle that area and move past it and wait to kind of burn them out of their ammo. And that's pretty much everything with regards to the unit-to-unit combat mechanics. Now there's also adjacency bonuses, like having a recon unit adjacent to an attacker actually gives you an accuracy bonus, and having multiple adjacent units gives you kind of a mass attack bonus. You can also place artillery and mortars in adjacent tiles for defense, and they'll also take part in the counterfire as support for their friendlies that are getting attacked. Units can also gain experience during combat, and as they lose strength, you can choose to reinforce the unit by paying prestige. Now normally this would lower their experience, but if you get an elite reinforcement, which costs a little bit more, the unit preserves that experience. Now units that you have in your campaign carry over from mission to mission, so keeping your veterans alive is extremely important. As well as reinforcing units, you can also upgrade them or give them overstrength. Essentially, if you're on a supply hex, which are typically cities or airfields, you can choose to change a unit into something else of a similar type. This can come in useful when you're facing a different situation than expected. You might have recently captured a supply hex at the front line and now you want to change your unit into something more defensive or just something else entirely. But be warned, you do lose your experience doing this, so it's not something you'd ever really want to do with a veteran. With overstrength, however, you're increasing their strength at the expense of more core slots and prestige, and this can be great to buff up one of your best units beyond their normal capabilities. So prestige is this kind of currency I've mentioned that you use to buy, reinforce, and improve units, and it's simply just earned by capturing the kind of capture hexes on the map, and a little bit is also earned each turn depending on your difficulty. Now, not all of these capture points are supply hexes, but usually a lot of them are, which allows you to then improve units as you move forward when you get that release of prestige. There are also airfields located around the map, and depending on their size, they can house different aircraft so they can strike deeper into the map. So when you take all of those mechanics, strength, suppression, encirclement, entrenchment, the variety of troops on land, air, and sea with all their stats and a variety of factions, you really do end up with a pretty complex amount of stuff going on and a lot of depth and challenge. And I have to say, at first I wasn't really that into the game. It seemed a bit simple, it was fairly easy to get a grasp of, but as I went further in the campaign, just a handful of missions, I couldn't beat it. I couldn't take Warsaw. Every time I tried, I just didn't have enough turns to do it the way I was doing it. I mean, this is Poland, right? It should be kind of easy, sort of. Since making this video though, I have really taken the time to look through all of the mechanics, so I could report back to you guys, and I now understand things a lot better. I never used veterancy upgrades, and I never realized my troops carried from one map to the other, so in my campaign I just had a bunch of severely immobile AA defense turrets, which is just not what you really need in a blitzkrieg. They were often just left behind doing nothing, couldn't catch up to the front line, the speed of my tanks. Now, I was also throwing tanks up against entrenchments, not realizing why I was doing literally 0 damage, but I understand now, and as I said, it's kind of gotten its hooks into me. I went from not being that interested, if I'll be perfectly honest, to buying the original game so I can play a little bit more of a complete experience while I wait for this one to come out. Now, in my preview build, there was just the Polish campaign and a few other similar locations as well as the random maps, but I never got to see the desert and snow types. So I look forward to seeing that in the future and seeing if there's anything that interesting that kind of comes along with that. There was also no multiplayer, but there is multiplayer in the game, and while I'm not a huge multiplayer guy anyway, I think it really could be a lot of fun playing against others. The AI does perform really well. They flanked me and they never did anything that I considered stupid, but I wasn't a great player either, so I'm not too sure. And like I said, on normal, I still found it quite challenging to know exactly what to bring to be more efficient in the tight turnaround time limit imposed on you. Now, in the random maps, the turn limit was much larger, and in some scenarios you can actually have like up to 6 other AI with you, so it seems like you can have really a lot going on. The airborne invasion of Crete scenario gives you almost the entire island of Crete in scope to play over, with around 40 units at your disposal right at the beginning. A nice design is that the game's pace is quite fast as well, so even with all that units, you're still not really sitting waiting for turns. The animations can play simultaneously and the camera is very fluid and snaps quickly and correctly to where the combat is. So enemy turns are very quick, as are your own. So that's really everything I played for Panzer Corps 2. I think the game looks and runs well, and I pointed out that there's no audio really in the game right now apart from a few sound effects for the combat, and it does make it feel very vacant, when you have all this text on screen, your commander speaking to you and there's no audio, there's no like background noise or anything. Now, I've been told that this is just because it's the work in progress build that there will be audio. I'm sure there will be, it'd be crazy if there wasn't, but that was really the only thing that stood out to me, as not quite been done yet. Anyways, I know this was a very stat-heavy video, but I just couldn't really think of another way else to describe the game without describing its mechanics quite literally. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you'd like to see me keep up with Panzer Corps as it approaches its release in March, please let me know in the comments, or even just by dropping a like on the video. It'll let me know that it's something that you'd like to see more of. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.